Go.
Welcome to the PRCA's Fuse podcast for the stories behind the great storytellers of our time, people with a passion for communications, hosted by myself, Farzana Baduel, speaking every fortnight to trailblazers in and around our industry. Our special guest today is Daisy Pack. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Farzana. It's lovely to be here.
Now, Daisy, I'm just going to share with our listeners a little bit about your impressive bio. Now, Daisy, driving positive transformation through a combination of empathy and commercial intelligence. She is the managing director of Hunter UK. Daisy Pack has represented some of the world's most famous brands over a career spanning more than 2 decades. Expert in insight-led creative campaigns which earn attention. Daisy has delivered award-winning work for a combination of mainstream, premium, and luxury brands. Daisy, I'm so thrilled that you're with us today.
Oh, thank you for that introduction, Farzana. It's super to be here.
So I wanted to start off with just understanding a little bit about what is the typical day in Daisy's life.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say that I'm not naturally a sporty person, Farzana, but I am absolutely someone that needs to sort of exercise first thing for the endorphins and for the mental health benefits. So, I tend to be sort of up and in the pool at 6 a.m. or going for a run. And interestingly, this is a habit that my first agency boss instilled in me back in the day. She funnily enough, hired an ex-SAS guy. This was long before British military fitness was even a thing, to take us running along the river. And we even entered a work team into the Great North Run, which was an incredible experience. But I have got to say, I haven't managed a half marathon since then, but I absolutely love doing park run and make sure I'm running sort of 5K or swimming sort of 35 laps every other day. But then it's sort of into the shower, and I'm definitely one who sort of subscribes to that shower effect. I tend to do my best creative thinking sort of after a good night's sleep and after a bit of exercise in the shower. My poor husband gets terribly frustrated that I'm quite often in there sort of writing notes on my phone when sort of inspiration strikes and he wants to get into the bathroom. And then, I guess it's sort of 7:30. It's off on the train to London, or perhaps walking my youngest to school. But very much like to kind of kickstart the work week with the priorities, catch up with the team. We're working kind of a hybrid schedule at the moment, 2 to 3 days in the office per week, but very much sort of believe strongly that real magic happens when we're all together and kind of building on each other's passions, which I believe comes easier in person. I'm definitely a morning person, so I tend to kind of power through work in the morning. So it might be writing pitch decks or plans or sort of crafting thought leadership, doing some prospecting or working on our growth strategy. And then sort of by about 2:00, the US wakes up, they come online. So my afternoons tend to fill up pretty quickly with meetings. We work very closely with our colleagues across the pond, and very lucky to have that centralised support and specialist skills of a team of 300 colleagues stateside, and we work hand in hand with them on a daily basis. I think sort of anyone in this industry, particularly agency side, will tell you that the best part of the job is the variety. So it could be that we're running an immersive influencer evening, or, working with partners on content creation. It could be delivering an earned media campaign or hosting a consumer pop-up for a diverse stable of clients. And then, after a busy day, it's sort of get home, eat supper, spend time with the family, usually watch something together before my boys go to bed around 8:30. I'm going to let them stay up late to watch the Bake Off final tonight, though, which is exciting.
So, Daisy, you mentioned something really interesting about you get some of your best ideas when you're, running or you're taking a shower. And I actually get my best ideas, weirdly enough, when I'm sitting in the bath. And it's, and then when we sort of have our brainstorming idea session with the team, my ideas just aren't that great, actually. And I wanted to kind of
Yeah,
just ask you, why do you think? And you're super creative and really known for your creative work. I wanted to just ask you, why is it that sort of the creative ideas, the innovative thinking is sort of when we're doing something mundane and not when we have our ideation session?
I think it's because we've switched off, and I think when we're at work we're so busy, we're juggling so many different priorities, we've got so much going on in our heads, and actually you sort of need that moment to switch off, to take a moment for the ideas and inspiration to come. It's definitely more of an art than a science, I would say. You have to sort of absorb culture and absorb the world around you to sort of have those flashes of inspiration, and they often come after you've had that moment to sort of decompress after a busy day, after you've had a night's sleep, or if you've got the sort of endorphins going. That's sort of when I tend to sort stuff out in my head, or in the shower. Definitely have my best ideas then, for sure.
I totally agree. And the other thing you mentioned is you work quite a lot with the US. And I wanted to just understand a little bit from your perspective is how do you think the sort of the culture in the US and Americans are different than us Brits? Because I go to the US quite a lot. I love America and I love working with Americans. I love their energy, their sort of optimism and positivity and so forth. And people often think, oh, actually, we speak the same language and there's so many similar cultural references that and they go to the US working out there thinking it's going to be pretty much the same as the UK. And actually, they are quite different. And I just wanted to know from your perception, how is it for you working with Americans and, your sort of vantage point in terms of their culture of, working versus ours?
Yeah, I mean, it is a gift, sort of being able to work closely with the guys on across the pond. But you're right, there are definitely sort of cultural differences. I also love their enthusiasm, and their energy and their passion, and I think that's such a great quality. I think we have a bit of tall poppy syndrome, perhaps here in the UK. Perhaps we're a little bit more sarcastic from time to time. But I do love, the Americans just sort of, are so supportive of one another, and that's super inspiring. I think, some of the differences. From a work perspective, that I've noticed, sort of perhaps some of the challenges have been around sort of educating the guys in the States about the sort of differences with the UK markets, from our industry. I think, again, perhaps we just have this sort of crisis of confidence here in the UK when it comes to PR. I think, in the States, they value PR more, and so they're compensated more for it. The budgets that clients have in the States are quite substantially different to what we're working with over here. And yeah, actually sort of being a CMS accredited agency, we really value the PRCA's benchmarking data. That's been hugely valuable in helping to sort of educate my colleagues in the States about the differences between the two markets. What are the average hourly rates? What are the average salary bandings? All those sort of things, the sort of fee income per head, just to kind of give them an idea. My mission is to grow the agency here in the UK, and it's quite a different beast to what they're working with over in the States. And they're very sort of lucky and privileged to have this sort of tremendously sort of well recognized, well established reputation. Hunter was founded in 1989 in New York, and is sort of hugely well awarded. We've just won Large Agency of the Year, I believe. So, sort of leads come to them organically, which is tremendous. But I think, here in the UK, we have to take almost a bit more of a challenger approach, because we're not as well known, even though we're delivering incredible work and have an incredibly talented team.
And you mentioned that you did the CMS with the PRCA. For those who are listening who aren't familiar, could you just explain a little bit about what it is, why you decided to do it, and where you found the value as someone running an agency here in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a great opportunity to sort of really showcase the processes of your agency and the professionalization of the service that you're delivering. So it's about basically you're assessed on sort of various different criteria. I think there are sort of 8 or 9 elements, and it sort of takes you through sort of business planning. So sort of, how to kind of how you're positioned yourself within the market, all the way through to delivering exceptional client service, and how you go about that campaign delivery, as well as through to sort of HR processes like sort of running evaluations and appraisals. So it's a tremendous recognition and accolade to have, because any client coming to you can see that you're a well-run, professionally run agency according to industry standards. And I think, again, we're sort of we're a relatively sort of small office here in the UK. We're quite sort of scrappy in nature, but I've sort of come from a big agency background. I've worked in sort of agencies of varying different sizes, but what I can bring is that sort of structure and process, and having that accreditation is hugely beneficial. To tell clients and sort of reassure them that we've not only got the might of the US behind us, but we've got this industry recognized structure in place too.
Fantastic. And Daisy, back to how you spend your day. News. News is such an important part of the work that we do to be plugged into what's happening, but there is so much out there. I want to know, how do you navigate being a PR, having to stay on top of news? What's your relationship like with various different news apps and social media, and how do you keep abreast of all of what is happening around us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're completely right there. I think what's interesting is that sort of I grew up surrounded by the papers, because my father was a former journalist. He was speeches editor at Press Association. So every weekend, I was sort of surrounded by the weekend supplements, and, sort of very much kind of grew up amongst that kind of culture. And, today, particularly at the weekends, I still love to buy a newspaper, the Sunday Times or the Guardian or Observer. But really, sort of mostly on a day-to-day basis, I'm relying on the Apple News app. And, I do wonder whether that algorithm is giving me a balanced view, or it's sort of perpetuating that echo chamber. It's definitely feeding me stuff that I'm interested in, but, is that healthy? I think sort of reading a physical paper, I do tend to find sort of obscure sort of snippets and articles in, odd little sections that I find really inspiring. So I think it's important to sort of expand what you're reading. And then otherwise, I'm a big Radio 4 fangirl. I'll listen to the Today programme in the morning. I love Emma Barnett and Women's Hour. These are shows that I love to kind of listen to absorb the kind of key debates and conversations. And then I think, my kind of guilty pleasure, if you like, is watching news rounds with my 10-year-olds, just because I love the kind of happy and sometimes weird news it delivers. And it's pretty informative in 10 minutes. My son tends to do pretty well in his general knowledge quizzes at school. So thank you, News Rounds, for that.
I love, oh God, I love Newsround. Just growing up, it just feels quite nostalgic even
It
hearing about it.
is John
God,
Craven.
yeah. Oh,
Say.
God. And when you look back at the, almost 2 decades spanning your career, do you look back and sort of think to yourself, well, actually, there's an overarching mission that you may or may not have been conscious of at the outset. And, going back to the Japanese concept of ikigai, what's your sort of, when you look back at your 2 decades, and also what's fueling you now for your current path? What patterns do you see emerging?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's interesting you mention ikigai. If I could just sort of take an aside, I will come back to what my mission is. But I, funny enough, know all about ikigai because last year we launched a luxury Japanese spirits brand called Ikigai Yui to discerning affluent millennials. And of course, as you say, that Japanese philosophy of ikigai is sort of associated with that feeling of self-fulfillment that you get from sort of pursuing a meaningful life, which was very much in tune with our audience's sense of drive. We were going after those kind of successful young entrepreneurs who sort of have that desire to constantly move forward and tackle complex challenges. And then the Yui part of the brand name, we've discovered actually literally translates as tying threads together. So we delivered this creative platform that really sort of showed how Ikigai Yui brings that sense of connection with others, with nature, and with yourself. And yeah, it was great fun. We launched the brand at one of London's hottest new bar openings, Soda and Friends, knowing that our audience really craves connoisseurship, and had a tremendous evening of tastings, food pairings, and education around the little known Japanese spirit category of Awamori. But I digress. I'm conscious of that. Sorry. When it comes to my own ikigai, I think it's quite simple, really. It's to deliver work that matters. Impactful quality campaigns which really provoke thought and inspire consumers to act and feel something. Just to briefly give another quick example, recently we opened up conversation around miscarriage during Baby Loss Awareness Week. This was last month, actually. And, I was really shocked to learn that a quarter of all pregnancies fail to go full term, which is terribly sad, particularly as many of those women are sort of suffering in silence. There's this real kind of silent grief around it. It's swept under the carpet. And our client actually, after experiencing her own pregnancy loss, created her own brand, Little Santi Designs, which is a beautiful line of rings to commemorate lost babies. So, that piece of work, our campaign was really to encourage those who had suffered miscarriage to share their stories if they were comfortable to, in that effort to kind of validate the emotions that you feel when losing a pregnancy at any stage, rather than sort of sweeping them under the carpet. But yeah, I think sort of you asked about my ikigai or purpose, sort of more sort of looking towards the future. And I guess, it's sort of wrapped up in my role, which is to grow the business here in the UK. And it is quite a unique position. I sort of mentioned earlier that we were founded in the 80s. We're almost like an established startup. We've got this sort of might of a recognised and awarded US agency and all the skills that it offers. We have specialist teams delivering insights and strategy, content production, and social and digital. But we've also got this highly talented and experienced UK team, but we're less well known, but still delivering this incredible work and service. So yeah, I guess my mission is to expand. Like our London office here was opened nearly 10 years ago in 2015, on the request, interestingly, of a long-standing client, Tabasco. So I need to sort of grow beyond this wonderful anchor client of Tabasco, but it's about getting our name out there in the local markets. I very much believe that the best way to do that is through our work. It should speak for itself. And really, that's what brings me most career satisfaction. It's that simple, really. It's delivering that great work and, tremendous service to clients as partners. And if we can make a difference at the same time, then all the better. But yeah, I guess it's sort of offering clients the best of both worlds, that sort of knowledge, agility, and service of a boutique, but with the muscle of a kind of 300-person strong multidisciplinary agency across the pond.
That's Brilliant. And what a brilliant client to launch with, Tabasco. I love Tabasco. I'd put it on my toothbrush if I could. I put it on everything. It's embarrassing. I remember when I was pregnant, I just had a craving for it. So I'd carry a little bottle in my bag with me. So wherever I'd go, I sort of use it.
Yes.
And they've got all these different ones now. They've got like a green
So
one. I was actually shopping the other day and I saw this whole range beyond the sort of the original, but let's not get Tabasco mad here. I've got a series of questions for you, Daisy. One of them I wanted to know. Your dad was a newsman. You were brought up in that world, yet you studied at UCL history with Italian. Totally understand why, because you got to spend a year in Venice. I
oh,
mean,
bless.
I don't need to ask you why you studied. Um, what I wanted to know is when you were at university, did you always know that you were going to enter into this world, and why choose PR and not media, not journalism, like your father? And so I just want to know a little bit about your thinking just before you entered the industry and what made you decide to enter the industry, because after studying, your first gig was the Spa Way, and which was obviously food and drink PR.
Correct. Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think, sort of like many people, I left university not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I was lucky enough to read history with Italian, and I did this 4 year course. So it did mean that actually many of my friends sort of graduated the year before me because they'd done 3 year courses. And funnily enough, a great friend of mine went into PR, and she really inspired me. I think, it really was a penny drop moment for me. As you say, my dad was a journalist, and it suddenly sort of all seemed to fall into place. I'd always sort of, really envied sort of people with, that sort of strong sense of vocation, who might have studied law or medicine or even become a teacher. They always sort of seemed to have a very clear sense of what they were going to be, from a young age. But I think, it took a little while longer for me. I left university. I sort of got grunt work jobs just to sort of earn money whilst I figured out what I wanted to do. But yeah, that sort of, Monday Media Guardian ad for a junior account executive at the SPA Way was a real gift. And, I was lucky enough to get that job. And funnily enough, it really did feel like a vocation. That those first few weeks, I became such a work bore. I talked of nothing else. I was so engaged and excited by the variety, pitching to journalists, coming up with news angles, researching, using my brain. It felt like this was what I wanted to do. And, might sound silly to sort of, get that highfalutin about having having that sort of vocation for PR, but I really felt strongly that this is what I was destined to do. So yeah, happy to have landed on it.
And you spent over 7 years, and Sparway's now Spider PR. And lucky you, I mean, food and beverage. My God, I mean, Jordan's, Clarence Court, Tyrrell's. I love Tyrrell's crisps. My God, I've got to really stop thinking about food. And then you moved over to Ketchum, where you became the associate director, and you were there for 6 years. What sort of insight can you share when you made that switch from Spa, now Spider, to Ketchum, in terms of culture, how agencies work differently, and what advice would you give to people who are listening, who are thinking of moving from agency to agency, and how to identify the right agency to move to?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a big difference. I'm sort of hugely grateful to my time at SPA. It taught me a lot. I think sort of the three key things were that sort of grounding in traditional media relations, building up my little black book of contacts, but importantly, instilling that sort of entrepreneurial spirit and that passion for the food and drink sector. So, yeah, as I said, sort of managed to build that food and drink specialism, which was amazing. But yeah, after 7 years, hugely grateful to the CEO and founder of SPA, who sort of really saw a quality in me and sort of supported me. And I feel like she has sort of similar qualities to Hunter's CEO, Grace Leong, in terms of that kind of charisma and gravitas, as well as recognizing and supporting talent. But I think it was inevitable that after 7 years, it was a mid-sized agency, SPA. It was 15 people when I joined, 30 by the time I left. I wanted to spread my wings and experience like a big global networked agency. So, I joined the food and drink team. And I think one of the first differences was working on mass market brands with bigger budgets. So I immediately expanded my skill set beyond traditional media relations. And bearing in mind, this is still sort of early doors, but we even did a content series, which I think we called Webisodes back in the day for Dolmio, and did some incredible sort of bigger kind of integrated campaigns. For example, for Seeds of Change, we ran the Dig Your Dinner campaign, which was recognised by the King, then Prince Charles, which is all about encouraging people to grow their own. But yeah, I think, I joined that food and drink team and managed to grow it. New business is definitely a sort of passion area for me, and sort of grew that within that first year, bringing on board brands like KFC and Uncle Ben's, Mr. Kipling and Lamott Wines. But quickly realised that little black book of foodie media contacts was perhaps less useful. Observer Food Monthly not as interested in Uncle Ben's as Chat Magazine might be, for example. So took that opportunity really to expand and broaden my sector expertise into other categories. So joined the health and beauty team, did a lot of work on P&G brands. That's been a sort of recurring theme throughout my career as well, and really dipped my toe in global for the first time as well, which I'm hugely passionate about. But yeah, I had a fantastic experience there, and it sort of was a great door opener for me as well. But I think sort of after 6 years, interestingly, working on the food team, we were able to do a lot of new business. But then working in the P&G business, we were conflicted out of going after and growing that particular team. So I was sort of missing that entrepreneurial vibe, if you like.
And what do you like about new business? What is it about business development that excites you? Because, it's really interesting because I've got a friend of mine who runs a law firm, and he said that in the sort of lawyer world, they call people sort of minders, finders, and grinders. And finders are people who find business, minders are sort of management, and then grinders are the people who do the work, the magic. And I thought that was really interesting. And he sort of talked about different sort of archetypes of characteristics that you find in each of the three. So I wanted to just understand from your perspective, what is it about business development that really excites you? Obviously, you've alluded to it in terms of the sort of entrepreneurial nature of it. But yeah, I'd just love to know a bit more about what is it that sort of really piques your interest.
Well, I love that. I'm going to use that moving forward. I can steal that off you. But yeah, one of our sort of values, I guess, is always hunting. And that's something that very much sort of applies to me. So I suppose I would put myself in the category of finders. It's about sort of pushing, really sort of, that constant pursuit of opportunities that might take us out of our comfort zone, sort of staying on the hunt, obviously, for new opportunities or even ways to wow our clients and evolve the agency. I think actually that's where you grow as an individual as well, by sort of not being complacent. But yeah, I suppose when I sort of first started in my career, I got that buzz from getting coverage, but then that sort of quickly evolved into winning new business. I just love the whole process from, going out and finding it and then digging into the business challenge, working out the best strategy, coming up with the creative ideas, and then presenting and pitching to clients. And there's nothing that beats that sort of high of, that you feel when you win a piece of business and bring them on board. And I think we find that a lot of our growth comes from organic growth, because we're so good at sort of, once we've won that business, nurturing those clients and delivering a quality service. That's what sort of tends to result in client growth, which is wonderful. But yeah, that initial buzz that you get from winning new business is unbeatable. That's, yeah, back to my ikigai.
And then after 6 years at Ketchum, you decide to move on. And what I wanted to ask is, what happened after Ketchum, and what advice would you give to our listeners in how they can make the decision of when is the right time to leave an agency, because you've had this amazing career that has led to this incredible position that you now have, this leadership role. How did you sort of chart your sort of career? Because some people sort of think to themselves, should I leave, should I stay, am I set in one category, like say F&B, and am I then being pigeonholed? So there's lots of questions that people sort of ask themselves as they are planning their career, and you've really played your career decisions really well. And I just wanted to sort of, looking back, if you could just share a little bit about your thinking.
Absolutely. And, I think there are always those pivotal moments in your career where you sort of you give yourself a talking to, and you have this sort of an internal monologue about sort of where you're going, what direction you're following. And certainly, I've had those moments and would sort of, advise anyone to sort of, think carefully, but really sort of listen to, what that inner monologue is saying. I after Ketchum, as I said, I felt like I was sort of missing that cut and thrust of the new business challenge. So I wanted to get back to a sort of slightly sort of smaller, vibey agency, and went on to join DeVries Slam. I don't believe it's around anymore, but it was the conflict shop for Weber Shandwick at the time. And it was a phenomenal place to work, full of hugely talented people, like very sort of dynamic and energetic, very young, buzzy, trendy agency. But interestingly, I ended up sort of working on some really interesting pieces of work that were targeting the over 50s market. So I had this tremendous opportunity when I joined. I was actually hired for my P&G experience, but ended up picking up a Western European toolkit for Quaker. And off the success of that, we won the UK business, which was amazing. And we were even given this incredible opportunity to sort of lead the integrated team. So to being that kind of coordinating lead for all the different agency partners across the marketing mix, which was, quite forward thinking for PepsiCo, the brand owner at the time. But we did this amazing campaign targeting the over 50s, definitely one of my in the shower inspiration moments. It was a campaign that was all about sort of morning routines called Superstart, with the wonderful Darcy Bustle, who was judging Strictly at the time. And yeah, I sort of came up with this idea to re-record that sort of 70s disco classic, The Hustle, that, our target audience would have boogied away to back in the day. And we re-recorded it with Darcy Bustle and changed the words to, of course, Do the Bustle. Tremendous fun, hugely successful, incredible results. And that actually led to us being invited to pitch for the entire PepsiCo portfolio, which we won. But then I worked on another, which was amazing. Also worked on another piece of business for P&G targeting the over 50s market on behalf of Pantene. And it was sort of encouraging, women over 50 to sort of buck conventions and actually grow their hair long. And it really sort of got me thinking around sort of targeting this audience. It was at a time sort of 10 years ago when everyone was obsessed with millennials. Now it's all Gen Zs or Zillennials, the sort of in-betweeners. But of course, it's the over 50s have the purchasing power. They've got the money. Why should we be sort of focusing on those sort of strapped for cash when actually, these people in their 50s and above have lived a life, and, they're sort of, they know who they are and what direction they're going in. I'm just so fascinated by them. And obviously this is well before Davina McCall put women over 50 are the menopause on the map. But I felt very passionately about that. But also, it did kind of spark this sort of pivotal moment for me. I wasn't heading towards my 50s, but I was approaching 40 in quite a vibrant, buzzy, young, youthful agency. I very much felt like the granny there. And it just sort of made me think, like long term, realistically, is this me? Is this what I want to be doing? And actually, I'd flirted with sort of setting up on my own, and I thought about, well, maybe this is the moment to do that. I even had my own first clients, Clarence Court, who I worked with back in the day at the start of my career, who were hugely supportive of me. But I guess, that lack of certainty was something that, I didn't love. And this tremendous opportunity to go and join Citizen Relations, which was, an agency that I'd long admired, came about to join their food team. So, they had great brands like GBK and Dr. Urtka. I brought on board Clarence Court and spent, a lovely sort of time talking about burgers and eggs and cakes. I was in my element, and had a wonderful 4 years growing that business, again working with incredible people, a few ex-Ketchumites and a really inspirational leader in Helena Fisher. And together we kind of grew the food team. We brought on board San Pellegrino and Electrolux and the Macallan. But then, COVID hit, and that was another sort of pivotal moment in my career that sort of made me reassess. I had such a tremendous time at Citizen. I'd gone on a bit of an awards trip. I was the resident award writer. We'd won all sorts of gongs for our work, which was super exciting. And learned a tremendous lot, done a lot of great work. But COVID just sort of made me think, well, I could quite happily bumble along doing this, but, is it going to give me that real sort of satisfaction? Really, I need to be sort of pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. And I was looking for a fresh challenge. And then this sort of unicorn of a job role came along. I couldn't have written it better. My dream job. The description was sort of, Hunter was looking for a managing director with food and global experience to grow the team, but with the support, so that safety net and backing of a big agency. So, that opportunity to run my own show, set my own growth strategy and identify those opportunity areas within an area that I absolutely loved was too good to pass up.
Before you took the role for Hunter, you obviously had a responsibility for your client portfolio, but really the responsibility of setting up, in essence, like a startup in the UK. You've got the best of both worlds because you've got the entrepreneurial sort of dynamism of shaping this new entity in the UK, but at the same time, you've got the sort of the backing of a major agency in the US. So you've got access to those resources. But it is very much also a different skill set being an MD of an organizer, of a PR firm, as opposed to an account director, associate director. What sort of skills, looking back, do you feel were really critical for you to have made that transition into being an MD for a Hunter and get the success that you've achieved? Because is it that sort of that commercial thinking, that sort of understanding of how to position and brand the agency within, and also there's an element with PRs that we're sort of seen as a bit of like having an attitude of cobbler's shoes, where we're really good at everyone else's sort of positioning and amplification and so forth. But when it comes to ourselves, which you really need to do when you're a new entrant in the market, you have to, in essence, you become your own client. So I just want to know a little bit about the sort of the shift of thinking, the different skill sets that you needed, and looking back, what sort of what are the lessons learned when you transitioned into this very meaty role as an MD?
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. All those points you made there. I think I've been lucky enough to sort of, because I've had this sort of passion for business development sort of throughout my career. I've been quite commercially minded, and I was a director at Citizen, and even at associate director level at previous agencies, I had sort of oversight of the P&L and, meeting those targets. So that was, something that I felt sort of comfortable with. Obviously, always sort of there's the thrill and the challenge of it, but it wasn't kind of, something completely foreign to me. I'd done quite a bit of that before, but I think I've learned a tremendous amount, sort of stepping up into this role in terms of just sort of running a business, even everything from like, yeah, all the finance processes, the HR processes, a lot of, going back to that CMS accreditation, professionalizing the agency has just been tremendous. But you're right. I think there is so much more to being an MD and positioning yourself in the market. You do almost have to become like your own client. It's very interesting, sort of drafting a business plan, a growth strategy. It is like writing a strategy for a client. It's all the same skills. How are we going to earn attention? How are we going to stand out, particularly in a cluttered market? And I think, life obviously wouldn't be interesting without those challenges. But I think particularly sort of standing out within the food and drink sector is a challenge. There are hundreds of different food and drink agencies, and one of the ways that I think we're a bit different and we've looked at things differently. I think we're one of the first, or perhaps even the only UK agency to actually grow distribution for a food brand via strategic menu placement within food service. And, that's sort of thanks to our work with Tabasco. It's quite a unique product because it sits behind the bar, but also in the kitchen as well. So, we've built up relationships with chefs, with the sort of most exciting sort of hot chefs in London and across the UK, to really sort of help drive that cultural currency and surround sound that you get from an integrated program. So, that kind of advocacy work is very much baked fully into our integrated campaigns. You might be sort of looking at a post from an influencer you follow, or then, they're recommending Tabasco, or you'll see a social ad about Tabasco, or you read something, in the papers, a survey about Tabasco, and then you'll go out for dinner and see it on the menu. So it's about sort of that constant reinforcement, and that's really helped sort of deliver exponential sales and reach clients' business objectives. So I think that's an interesting point of difference. Of course, I guess our motto here at Hunter is that we earn it. It's all about sort of that earned first approach. I think people see earned as particularly powerful because it's sort of that merit through a third party's eyes. But yeah, I mean, we're able to kind of bring that sort of skill set of earning attention, of sort of inserting brands into culture, to whatever kind of discipline we're looking at. So not just sort of earned media, but we're looking at earned first social, influencer. It's about sort of understanding storytelling and inserting brands into culture. So yeah, I think of course, a lot of agencies will say they do that, but I think we truly have that depth of skills in that area, and it's something that clients are looking for more and more. Particularly as we as consumers are getting our information from so many different channels. So yeah, it's been a hugely rewarding and fulfilling experience.
So you work quite a lot with influencers.
Mm.
And when you work with influencers, do they tend to be just influencers who are sort of known for content around food and beverage, or do you sort of go wider?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Listen, food and drink is very much our heartland, but it's not the only sort of sector that we work across. We run a lot of influencer campaigns for Amazon, for example. And I think sort of being the UK office of Hunter, we've managed to sort of work on big brands like multi-brand owners like Danone and Diageo, and obviously they're food and drink brands, but lots of others sort of outside of the category as well. So yeah, of course we do work with a lot of food and drink influencers, but yeah, we work with interiors influencers or parenting influencers. I think the beauty of food and drink is that it's such a leveler, and it sort of spans everyone's daily lives. So you can kind of insert it authentically into any sort of influencer's feed, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that sort of core specialism. I think sort of actually what is interesting around influencer marketing, Hunter recently ran some research into different sources of influence. And interestingly, it found that, obviously not surprising, word of mouth through friends and family sort of remains that greatest sort of source of persuasion. But funnily enough, the younger cohorts, so the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas, they almost now perceive influencers that they follow to be their friends. So, if they follow someone who they particularly admire, or who says or posts items that really resonate and connects with them on that deep level, that really chimes with how they perceive themselves to be, they almost sort of see those figures as their friends, or at least as influential as their friends. And I think, this is quite an interesting shift, and really kind of shows the importance of influencer marketing, particularly when it comes to inserting brands naturally into the feeds of those individuals, whatever kind of, their particular sector or angle might be.
That's so interesting. I remember a few years ago, my daughter was following a California-based influencer who has these rabbits, and she bought a rabbit pram. And my daughter was like, "I want to buy that rabbit pram." And I said, "Yes, but do some research, come up with 3 to 5 options, do the pros and cons, and then give me what your sort of valuation is." She looked at me. She said, "No, I want that rabbit pram that she is advocating." And I said, "But Isabella, you know." You need to go and have a bit of a wider sort of research. She's like, "No, Mama, I trust her." And I said, "Why do you trust her?" And she said, "Because I like her." And I thought, God, oh, uh, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about social media platforms. So,
Mm.
have you done sort of like, have you also got any insight to share in terms of which social media platforms actually perform the best in terms of, in terms of brands and influencers coming together? And also, I wanted to ask you a little bit about this sort of exodus from X into blue sky, and how does that impact how you advise your clients? Because social media, my God, it's just constantly, the goalposts are moving and changing, and and it's so fascinating, how some platforms have, I don't know, more male than female, others are sort of more lifestyle. If you post, I don't know, on LinkedIn, the same thing that you'd post on Facebook, you could get cancelled. There's all these rules around all these different platforms. So I wanted to just understand from your perception about these different platforms, and just to give us a little bit of insight, because you obviously have such an incredible vantage point.
Well, thank you, Farzana. Yeah, I mean, it is quite a sort of extraordinary landscape right now, isn't it? I think you're so right. There are, different styles of content for different platforms. So, if you're on Instagram, of course, it's all around that sort of aspirational kind of perfect view of life that perhaps isn't quite real life, but sort of, is sort of picture perfect. Whereas you've got TikTok, which is a lot more kind of rough and ready and authentic, and it's sort of, perhaps more tongue in cheek, and I think a lot of our clients are really interested in sort of playing to both channels, and sort of seeing, testing and learning on different channels to see where they could fit. But really mostly it's about sort of how can you insert that brand authentically into a feed, and that's where our kind of earned first approach comes. It's about sort of subtly shaping the content so that it it really does the job of that rabbit influencer who kind of persuades your daughter to kind of, this is the rabbit pram you need. But yeah, interestingly, I've just recently sort of hopped onto Blue Sky myself. I'm seeing an awful lot around that sort of exodus to Twitter. It's very, sorry, from Twitter. It's very interesting. Obviously, sort of recent developments and the sort of politics behind it. It feels like perhaps Blue Sky might have more of a liberal left-wing angle to it. So at the moment, we're kind of watching and learning and listening and seeing, what it's all about and soaking it all up to be able to best advise our clients. But I think, from an earned media perspective, of course, media relations is still so important. It is the bedrock of what we do. And so many journalists were on Twitter that are now moving over to Blue Sky. So I think it's sort of really important to stay tuned into what's happening on those social channels too, and, take advantage of any opportunities that might crop up.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating, especially the sort of some brands are saying we are not going to continue on X,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting because we always knew which newspapers were right of center, left of center, and now what's happening is social media platforms are echoing these political
Yeah.
biases that traditional legacy media have, whereas before it was just this town hall that everybody came together. So it's really, really quite fascinating the sort of segmentation that's happening,
Mm,
not only on gender and age, but now it's happening on sort of on political sort of leanings, which is really, really fascinating. Now,
mm.
I read that Hunter has been recently named for second year in a row within Newsweek's top 100 most loved workplaces. Now, what does Hunter do that that enables it to have a second win in a row? And why is it loved so much?
Well, I'm so pleased you mentioned this, Farzana. I'm super proud of this accolade because, in particular, it's the UK office that got this accolade. So, yeah, feel very warm and fuzzy feels about this. So, thank you. I think interestingly, it's very much about sort of our values based way of working. And, over the course of my career, I've worked at kind of 5 or 6 different agencies, both big and small. But what really stands out about Hunter is how staff genuinely, truly do live by its values. They're woven into everything we do. We even evaluate staff's performance and at their annual appraisals based on how they are showing these values. I mentioned always hunting being one of them that's sort of particularly relevant for me in my role. It's about sort of that kind of constant pursuit of opportunities. Better Together is another one, again, that I've sort of talked about, having that kind of real magic when we're all in person and building on each other's passion and expertise. I think another one that is so true of my team here that I'm so proud of is caring harder. We really do go above and beyond. We find reward in sort of sweating those details. And we definitely have that bias for action. I think we're a relatively small team here, so there are no airs and graces. We all roll up our sleeves for our clients and for one another. And then importantly, it's about sort of creating that inclusive environment where everyone sort of feels free and encouraged to express their creativity. So ideas are always welcome, within the office, whatever your point of view. And another one that I've definitely mentioned, my ikigai is that work that matters. So yeah, being obsessed with creating that quality, impactful work that really inspires consumers to act. And I think sort of apart from that, we're a very close-knit and supportive team. Every month here in the UK, we recognise and celebrate each other's work. We award a Hunter of the Month accolade to those that have sort of, demonstrated our values to achieve a stellar results. We have a culture club to encourage teams to get out and attend and report back on cultural experiences. And we have, very generous sort of benefits, things like 3 summer Fridays throughout the summer months. One Friday can be taken off during June, July, and August, on top of your normal holiday allocation. And apart from that, I think, I'm personally a believer in that kind of lifelong learning, that sort of growth coaching that will fuel the growth of our people, which will in turn fuel the growth of our business. So, everyone is given an educational stipend to spend on training. And I think, these are perhaps sort of some of the reasons, in surveys, the team always say that they feel they've got this strong connection to their colleagues and co-workers, and a great sense of pride working at Hunter. So, yeah, very happy to have won the Newsweek Awards twice in a row.
Fantastic. Now, last question before we move on to our sort of quick fire round. I am not that familiar with the consumer space. I am more sort of government, development, and corporate, but I've always had this niggling feeling that consumer types have far more fun. and, what I'd love to know from yourself is, having spent 2 decades in consumer PR, and not only food and beverage but wider, what are the sort of the trends that you are beginning to sort of see? Because it's very fast moving. And we just discussed, obviously, the social media platforms is just one of the sort of tectonic plates that underpin the consumer sort of PR world. But just from your perspective, what additional changes and shifts are you seeing in the world, in consumer land?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have tremendous fun. I've got to say, I do love my job. I'm very lucky in that sense. But, actually, sometimes you get the sort of greatest rewards from the less glamorous clients too. So it's not all sort of, fashion week and champagne. Um, but yeah, I mean, apart from that, you're absolutely right. The landscape has really sort of shifted over the last couple of decades. And I think, there has been this sort of intensifying fight for attention. The amount we check our phones, I think, has increased. It increases 30% year on year. So breaking through the noise and clutter has really become far more challenging as the years have gone on. And we're in terms of sort of trends, as you say, we've seen this shift away from big institutions, from the sort of traditional media through to individuals, citizen journalism, UGC, that, influencer marketing, it's all viewed more than traditional media is today. And I think, equally, today's consumers have quite a sophisticated consideration set. They very much sort of use discovery as social currency. They're interested in a brand's backstory and its values, and how it's contributing to society. Yet, sort of delivering on sort of some more of those ESG type goals, sustainability, climate change, that's become the baseline. And we are sort of seeing a bit of a shift there again, a bit of a backlash there. Really, brands just need to go above and beyond to stand out in this climate. So, our solution very much in the face of these challenges is, as I say, to sort of help brands show up in the cultural moments that matter to their audiences. We insert brands into those existing conversations, and we do that by sort of finding that intersection, if you like, between the brand's world. So if you can imagine a Venn diagram, you've got the brand world here and their communications objectives, the messages they want to deliver, with the real world. So yeah, what influencers are posting about, what cultural movements are gaining traction, what media and publishers are writing about. And it's this sort of intersection where brands can really engage authentically and with relevance. And this is something that we've done for our brands like Jonga Kimchi, making as much of a cultural sort of mark in the UK as in its homeland. Or, it could be putting Tabasco on pizza with the weirdest flavor combinations possible, or even, something like for Amazon Kids Plus, sort of combating that demonization of screen time narrative by actually sort of showing through parenting influencers that the subscription to Amazon Kids Plus delivers that enriching edutainment. and is beneficial for kids' development, enabling audiences to sort of banish that kind of inner guilt in favour of control. But yeah, it's certainly been an interesting one. Sort of, it's over the course of my career, sort of seeing how the landscape has changed immeasurably. It's totally different to back in 2000 when I started, and it was pure media relations all the way.
God, I remember those days, media relations and the odd event, if you're lucky,
Yeah,
an award submission.
yeah.
Now, now we move to the last bit of our conversation, and my question for you is: who is the communicator that you admire the most, past or present? Your choice.
Well, it's a great question. I think as someone who really deliberates over every word and sort of, I'm one of those people that usually thinks of the perfect reply hours later, or more likely in the middle of the night. I've utmost respect for those, sort of public figures whose off the cuff remarks just absolutely cut to the chase. So, on multiple occasions, I've loved it when Andy Murray has corrected reporters for overlooking female players. And then, sort of more recently, Saoirse Ronan on Graham Norton. Oh, that was just delightful when she sort of sliced through that male banter with the stone cold truth that, actually self defense is something that girls have to think about all the time. Those brilliant oof moments, they're always wonderful. But I think, when it comes to those whose deliveries are clearly sort of carefully planned and executed, I think it's been really fascinating recently to sort of see public figures announcing health issues via personal video message. Obviously, the Princess of Wales comes to mind. She chose not to issue a release to the media, letting the world know about her chemotherapy treatment. And then, more recently, Davina McCall followed suit by taking to her socials to reveal that she was having a brain tumor removed. And I think that, this is so interesting that it's much more direct, it's much more emotional way of communicating, but perhaps another sign of the dwindling power of the press. But yeah, very much admire both women's communication styles, particularly how they use their kind of platform to campaign around the issues that matter to them. Kate obviously talking about sort of better mental health supports. And Davina, I mentioned her earlier, I think sort of debunking the mysteries of the menopause and raising awareness around the benefits of HRT and opening up that conversation. I think, from our own industry, I super admire people like Joe Carr, who sort of talked openly about this issue, about tackling symptoms in the workplace to drive greater understanding. And I'm conscious I've not given you one answer here, but I have one more person that I wanted to mention. I think just going back to that kind of quality that definitely Davina has, that I admire in the best communicators and entrepreneurs, which is that sort of relentless energy to get her message across. And I think that tenacity is something that you see in Stephen Bartlett as well. Whatever your views on him, I think his trajectory is just a masterclass in PR. As co-founder of what at the time was quite a relatively obscure social media marketing company, Social Chain, he very cleverly aligned himself with rock star CEOs, borrowing their equity through his immensely successful and prolific podcast, Diary of a CEO. And I think, actually, if you look at interviews with him, he consistently tells the same story, that sort of rags to riches narrative. He dropped out of uni. He had to steal frozen pizzas to survive whilst building his business. These are details that kind of pop up consistently in all his interviews. And I think that kind of repetition really reinforces the messages that he wants to get across, that sort of humble beginnings narrative and relatability. And I think another thing, he shows remarkable resilience and self-belief, which, makes me think of that Henry Ford quote about whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. And I think, that's another trait that successful entrepreneurs have. Oh, I can't hear you. You've lost the sound.
But Bartlett has been so fascinating to watch. His incredible rise, and also what's been incredible to watch is the Times did a few sort of negative pieces on him,
Mm.
sort of pulling apart what he says and what in their opinion was the reality. And what's been incredible, it's just hasn't really affected
No,
the enthusiasm that people have. And again, it just shows sort of new media and legacy media and just the emotional resonance that he's able to build with his audience, that irrespective of a Times article saying, well, actually, his backstory may not be entirely as he's saying, and people are like, you know what, we don't care, we're still going to listen to him, we still like him, we're going to buy the products that he's plugging. And I think he also there was some issue with, I think, Huel the brand as
yes,
well.
the
And
ASA
just
and
because
Zoe.
yeah, because I think he's got a percentage, or he's got some ownership there, but wasn't explicit when he was talking about Huel on his podcast. So, you've got these sort of scraps with legacy media and regulatory bodies, but yet does not dim his light. So
No,
that's really, really interesting that we have these characters emerging like Teflon. We have had in
it's so
politics Boris Johnson, Trump. It doesn't really matter what they do. It doesn't matter what authoritative figures and platforms sort of call them out. They just keep going like Duracell bunny rabbits. It's
extraordinary.
extraordinary. Extraordinary. Thinkers now, that's the next thing I want to ask. What thinkers have had the most impact on you? They could be authors, poets, philosophers, podcasts.
Well, funny enough, I think I mentioned earlier, I love radio, particularly Radio 4, and I love podcasts too. I think because it's such an easy way to absorb knowledge and learn on the go. And I, personally will always listen to a podcast when, I'm out for a run or commuting into work. And every month I share a podcast I've been listening to with the team and encourage them to share their favourites too. I think audio is such a powerful medium, and one I definitely recommend to clients because it's so hugely personal and intimate. You really feel like you get to know and trust the presenter. I feel like I know you, Farzana, listening regularly to Fuse. Um, but yeah, I think anyone who knows me will know that for me, the OG of podcasts was the sadly no longer High Low with Pandora Sykes and Dolly Alderton. Do you know that one? Oh, just the dream. It was absolutely the perfect blend of pop culture, that perfect segment, Dole's polls devoted to the most ridiculous PR surveys. But, also that kind of other side to it, sort of, a lot of discussion around books and sort of more serious campaigns and conversations. And I think, what really came across was the friendship between the two women. And I think others have replicated that formula, whether it's Shameless or Miss Me, both excellent. I love How to Fail, of course, as well. But yeah, nothing quite touches the High Low. I wish they'd bring it back. Otherwise, for recommendations, I feel like I keep mentioning Davina, but I love Making the Cut, one that she does with her boyfriend, Michael Douglas, who is a hairstylist that I worked with on P&G brands back in the day. And then otherwise, I think for those sort of starting out in their careers, I would really recommend listening to When It Hits the Fan with Simon Lewis and David Yelland. It's such a great listen. So it tends to focus more on issues management and corporate reputation, but absolute fascinating glimpse behind the curtain. I think other kind of work-focused podcasts, love Uncensored CMO, Gen Z on Gen Z, Stories and Strategies. And then, you mentioned books. Reading is sort of one of the great pleasures in my life and my favorite way to wind down. I'm lucky enough to have a fantastic group of intelligent female friends. We meet once a month for book group, and it's truly a tonic. Many of them are in the comms industry. We've all been through sort of highs and lows and support each other along the way. And so I'm super grateful to that network of wonderful women in my life. But yeah, in terms of workbooks, I've read Smart Brevity this year. I'd recommend that one. It's definitely an interesting one. And yeah, just lots of books for pleasure. The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. The List of Suspicious Things by Jenny Godfrey. But, perhaps I'm going off topic there a bit.
Now, next question. What career advice would you give to your younger self?
Well, I've been so lucky to work with incredible people throughout my career who've really kind of encouraged and championed me. And that's definitely something that, I try to emulate for others. But there, with that in mind, I think there are a few pointers that I'd give my younger self. The first is, we've touched on it today, but taking every opportunity to learn and upskill. As we've talked about, the PR industry has changed immeasurably over the last 25 years. I've been lucky enough to have lived through some incredibly exciting shifts. The birth of social media, like when I started, it was all faxes and spray mounds, now it's obviously very different in today's world. And, we're sort of seeing this kind of merge into the interdisciplinary skills beyond earned media. Many of our clients are sort of coming to us, as we've talked about, for influencer marketing or social media support. And, I think we are very well positioned to excel in these areas, understanding what makes a good story, how to earn attention, and sort of inserting brands into culture. But I think, knowing what we know now, I would urge my younger self to sort of future proof even further by upskilling in those areas. I think my second piece of advice would be to follow your passion, but don't get pigeonholed. And I feel like I have sort of followed this words of wisdom throughout my career. So food and drink is absolutely my passion area. But I'm also sort of very flexible and understand that those skills can be applied to big brands, whatever the sector. So just having that kind of flexibility to diversify and be able to apply skills to different areas. And then my final piece of advice, which I would give to anyone, which I think is a practical one but an important one, and that is, at the end of each week, to record your achievements and challenges. We work in such a fast-paced industry. We're always looking forwards. But it's important to sort of take a moment to capture what you've done, the achievements and the hurdles before they've left your mind for the next big thing. I think, the PR industry is notoriously bad at PRing themselves. But actually, if you've got that sort of record of all the great work you've done, then it's a really helpful reminder, for everything when it comes to appraisals, or, even as a confidence booster to sort of combat the old imposter syndrome that we all suffer from.
I wanted to ask you, apart from running and swimming and your sisterhood coming together every month and talking about books, what other mental health and well-being hacks can you share?
I mean, I think, those are my big ones, but absolutely, I'm blessed with the most incredible family. So having family time with my husband and my two boys is just my idea of bliss. I'm super lucky. They're incredible. My eldest is 13. The youngest is about to turn 11. But, I think country walks, they always grumble, but we love them. Really got into walking during lockdown and COVID, and perhaps we're not doing quite so much of that. So we need to get out in the fresh air again. Board games. My eldest is big into chess, so I'm quite often at chess tournaments with him these days. But yeah, they're an absolute joy. And yeah, I'm very lucky.
Brilliant. And Daisy, for listeners who would like to learn more about you, they want to reach out, how can they do so?
Yes, please do reach out to me. I guess sort of LinkedIn is probably the easiest. It's just Daisy Pack. I'm easy to find, and yeah, very happy to chat.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Daisy. It's been such a fascinating conversation and sharing your journey with our community. I mean, 2 decades, so enriched. You've worked with multiple different agencies, and you've got this incredible gig now. Really, in a way, it's forging your own sort of agency within an agency in a new market. So it's been really insightful hearing about your journey. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Farzana. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's been a delight.
And may I also suggest, for those who are interested in creativity, there's a wonderful piece in Creative Brief, if you Google Daisy Pack and Creative Brief, about the importance of breaks for creativity. And I found that a really interesting, insightful read. Now, thank you also for listening. You'll find this episode on the PRCA's YouTube channel and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts alongside other episodes. If you like what you hear, please do share so we can grow our community. And of course, if you have any feedback or topics you'd like us to cover or any other extraordinary storytellers, please do reach out and let us know. We publish interviews every 2 weeks, so do stay tuned as we have some inspiring stories in the pipeline.